Okay, so welcome everyone. This is for the recording. And Jordan, if you're ready, you can take it away.
Okay, let me get the share screen set up for sound, optimized for video, and then let's make it full screen. Okay, thanks everyone for showing up and coming to this chat. I plan on speaking for maybe about 20 minutes and then having the rest of the time set aside either for Q&A and or for experimenting with some of the pieces of software that I'm going to be presenting. So today's talk is titled "Failure is Fun: Experimenting with VR and Video Gaming for Pedagogy," and I think I mean I named it this way, and I think the title is important because experimenting with any new pedagogical tool or software opens us up to failure. And we're in a time, specifically in the pandemic, but even just in our kind of current digital age, where new pieces of software and tech are being presented all the time. And it takes some working out of the bugs to get things going and to get things useful for as viable methods. And so I've been trying to experiment with my pedagogy quite a bit more, only because there's some really cool things that you can do. And in doing so, because it is experimentation and because failure is bound to happen, I actually think keeping lessons of video gaming in mind are important. This is where we start to see video games themselves as an important methodological and conceptual tool, and that there are lessons to be learned from our encounters with video games and using video games. And I think specifically is that video games teach us that failure can be fun while encouraging creative exploration. There's rarely any shame in failing at a video game, or they shouldn't be when it's done at its best. And I think keeping video games in mind when constructing our courses means considering and attending to the broad ecosystem of relationships that are formed between players, between the creators of these games, and between us as educators, making sure we've got all those factors in play, as opposed to other media where it might be a bit more passive or more easy to not think about the kind of inherent relationships between those three things. For us as pedagogues and using video games in particular, we need to keep those in mind. We also, I think, tend to think of video games as being just for fun. But as valuable as fun and play might be, and they are important in teaching, I think the larger purpose for using video games is to help us create spaces for meaningful development. For video games to be meaningful for education and to be used as educational environments themselves, I think practicing intentionality in design and being open to failure is essential. Just a quick kind of plug for some of the stuff I'm involved in. You can find me on Twitter at Jordan B. Lowen. I'm also part of a local digital art collective here in Syracuse that focuses on video gaming and blends all sorts of kind of video game production type stuff with kind of academic rigor. So if you're interested in some of the work you can do, you can find us at CoinOpCollect on Twitch and or at our website, coinopcollective.com. So let's begin. Today's agenda. So I'm going to do a quick state of gaming and VR, giving out some gaming demographics and the current state of the industry, so folks get a sense of why we need to be taking gaming more seriously. Then I'm going to lay out and go quickly through some different types of gaming experiences folks can consider, because oftentimes with video gaming, the pop culture ideas are the ones that dominate. So we tend to think of big name games like Call of Duty or Fortnite as that's what gaming is. And I want to expose us to some different ways of thinking about games as cultural artifacts. So we're going to be looking at adver games, news games, and serious games. And then I'm going to do a brief talk about how gaming has been used in pedagogy probably for the past 10 years, and kind of complicate why things like gamification and shared worlds can be a bit problematic. And before moving into the last section, where I'm going to talk about the experiments I've personally had with gaming in VR, we're going to look at Discord, Frame VR, and Twitch. So that's today's agenda. If you want to check out for the first 10 minutes, you're welcome to. And if you're only interested in part of this talk, we can get to those parts later. But let's dig right in. So what are games? According to Salen and Zimmerman, games are a system in which players engage in artificial conflict defined by rules that results in a quantifiable outcome. Now, I'm sure in most of our disciplines, what constitutes our object of study is always in a place of negotiation, and games are no different. The definition of games is still very much being argued across the board, but this is the one I've kind of settled on as the one that most folks in the field kind of accept or at least are settled with. What makes games unique? So games are automated systems, they're reconfigurable and responsive, and they provide a level of interactive immediacy. So this is just some of the general terms for thinking about kind of games more academically. We can talk more about this later, but this is just to give you a sense of what kind of game studies looks like and what we're talking about. Now, in terms of demographics, so this is data that was from 2019. We haven't got the 2020 data or the 2021 data, but I'm sure the numbers have increased even more given the nature of quarantine and the pandemic. But as of 2019, 75% of Americans have at least one gamer in their household. Gamers are likely to play it as a creative hobby or also play musical instruments. The demographics, I'm sure, have also shifted too, and that it's been interesting to see the trend shift from gaming being primarily a male-dominated experience to women taking more and more part. The same thing works for race and sexuality as well. We're seeing the demographic shift to become more expansive, which is very exciting. But again, as of 2019, these were the numbers that we were looking at. In terms of the industry itself, we'll see the numbers for the types of revenue that gaming has generated have been shooting up for the past decade and a half, from 2010, it being a $17 billion industry to it now being, again, 2019, a 24, I think this is billions. It might be, yeah, it does says in billions, $1 billion industry, surpassing film and television as the primary kind of revenue source in terms of entertainment media. We also, but it gets a little bit complicated because it also includes hardware and other accessories, which some of these other media do not have. So there's numbers for pushback, but regardless, the numbers are big. And because the numbers are big, it means a lot of people are using it, which means we need to be kind of keeping it in mind. There's a significant amount of our workforce and a significant amount of our students that are going to or already are involved in the industry in terms of producing content or working for companies that are making content. There's a significant amount of money to be made. Although, again, these numbers are a bit skewed because the lowest programmers aren't making anywhere near $100,000 a year. But those who are in the higher ups are certainly making quite a bit of money. And that was in 2016. So these numbers, again, just to give you a sense of what we're working with. Gaming is huge. It's huge here in the US. It's huge around the world. And for the majority of our students, they're engaged in some way or another, whether they're playing on their phones, whether they got dedicated PCs, whether they play on console systems, or are using kind of the digital media to now play Dungeons and Dragons, which is becoming huge. Lots of folks are involved in gaming and experience gaming in their kind of weekly, if not day-to-day lives. So this gives us a sense of how big it is, the scale, and why it's important for us as scholars to be considering some of these questions and some of these issues. So now to think through some types of gaming experiences. So the first thing we're going to talk about is advert games. These are games made by or at the request of a company in order to promote their product. So you see this in banner ads as like the cheapest version if you're distracted on a web page and there's like a little game to play to point you to another website. This is also in terms of flash games. The link here takes us to one by Sony. They invented a game where you have to smash your fingers back and forth in order to jump over a couch. I don't even remember what they're trying to sell, but companies are definitely using video games because they know like the demographics that they're reaching for are familiar with this medium. The benefits for them is that it allows for voluntary engagement, whereas ads are more passive. Making an ad video game allows the consumer to actually participate in whatever artificial way with the product that you're trying to sell. So advertisers are interested in that. There's also the opportunity for viral possibilities. If the company creates some sort of game that's silly and gets people talking, then it's going to bring more eyes onto their product. biggest example, this is way back, this is 20 years ago, was Pepsi Man in 1999, where you would run around real world locations delivering delicious Pepsi to thirsty patrons. And there was heavy branding on everything. So these are some of the pictures you can see. This is Pepsi Man for the original PlayStation. You're just on a skateboard throwing Pepsi at people. I actually remember playing this game way back when, but I'm sure a lot of people may have missed it. But this is just one of the things that companies are kind of doing to take advantage of the medium and get more eyes on their products. Next up, we have news games. So this was a more recent development from probably about a decade ago, and I haven't seen as many in the past few years. But news games are games which engage or comment upon current events. Often they utilize game conventions or mechanics for further impacts. Some of the benefits, again, viral possibilities. So some of these games were created by the New York Times to highlight certain conflicts or issues going on in the world. They tend to be more engaging for audiences. So much like the advertisers who are using video games to get more eyes on their product, news organizations were doing the same, but the hope was less about getting it on a product they could sell and more about highlighting current issues or events or states in the world. The problem is that to be up to date, to be something newsworthy, requires kind of getting stuff out quick, and games are hard to make. So oftentimes you would see these games, these news organizations would have been making the games ahead of time, and then when they publish their big article, they include the game along with it, so that it makes it kind of a relevant, more engaging topic. They're also difficult to document, and sometimes they can alienate users. So again, making a game for your news article is going to alienate the demographics that aren't quite used to or familiar with video games as content. Some of the most notable ones are the voter suppression trail. This is New York Times news game that came out in 2018, where they were teaching about voter suppression. So the game was inspired by the Oregon Trail, where you make decisions and then the game spits out consequences of those decisions. And it allowed you to play 3 different characters. If we have some time later, maybe we'll get someone to actually play through and share their screen of what that looks like. Another game was September 12th, and then Darfur is Dying, which was getting to the civil war in Darfur, where you play as a refugee trying to hide from gunmen. So these are all ways of kind of getting these worthy news events and giving people more ways of experiencing the story. And so news games are a bit rarer, again, because of development, but nevertheless, they're introducing really interesting and valuable lessons that can be picked up and used in classes that are even beyond gaming. So this isn't even about video gaming. This is about using video games to teach, to show, to get other ideas out there. Oh, we got a comment. Oh yeah, thanks Daniel. So Daniel says Flash as a term might not last long, considering Adobe Flash has been unsettled. That's true. So it used to be a lot easier for folks to just kind of whip out games that were relevant because they used a program called Flash, but Flash has lost support. So all these old games that used to be based on this particular programming software aren't going to be supported anymore. So some of these things might not even be accessible. So this is actually an interesting question for archivists and library folks who are trying to make sure we have access to this stuff. But what's great is that there are even newer, easier tools for creating games. So hopefully we won't have these Flash-based games. We'll have other kind of quickly or easily produced games, and we might start seeing more content. And then last but not least, we have serious games. So serious games is a proper term that is also contested. These are folks who are using games specifically designed to explore real world issues, personal hardships, or psychological and physical conditions. These are usually games that are considered part of the independent scene. So you won't typically see serious games in AAA development, and that's because AAA folks or the big studios want to avoid controversy. So they're not going to be dealing necessarily with these kind of personal issues or hard concepts with the same depth as some of these serious games or independent games can do. Not to say the big name games avoid difficult conversations completely. We're seeing companies in the news all the time, but serious games in particular as a genre tend to be these kind of smaller, hyper-focused interactive experiences where people can focus on a particular topic or issue. Some of the benefits is that they illustrate issues of agency and complicity, complicity, which we can see at the end of my talk. If folks want to explore what some of these games can do, they engage with younger audiences. The drawbacks is that some of these games can be hard to follow. They don't use the flashy graphics that other things do. They can be hard to keep updated, like Daniel mentioned with Flash. If the software behind them isn't updated, then these games can be lost, which means for using them for teaching purposes, if we don't have our own copies, it might be hard to give them out to students to play around with. Some of the most notable examples are Freedom Bridge, Loneliness, and Depression Quest. Depression Quest in particular made the news a few years back as part of a controversy called Gamergate. Yeah, we'll play them at the end. I thought about showing them some now, but if folks are interested, we can come back and we can play some later. So this is giving you a sense, again, of three very different ways that games can, we can view games as these particular cultural objects, and the types of things that can do. When we play them later, hopefully you'll get a better sense of how they might be incorporated in generating conversations in your courses, whatever it is that you teach. Assuredly, there is a game out there that can help you think through and discuss it with your students. And it might end up being in one of these three genres, if not one of the big AAA games. Oh yeah, so some pictures. So the picture on the top, that's Loneliness. You play a small cube, and as you approach the other cubes, they kind of disperse. And then Depression Quest was basically kind of an interactive story exploring one person's daily living with depression. So gaming and pedagogy. This is how often over the past decade these games have been used. First, we've seen a lot of use of shared worlds in the early kind of days of gaming and pedagogy. People played a lot of Second Life. You all may have had a Second Life experience with one of your professors, because in the late and early aughts, this was the thing, like getting professors and lecturers to create Second Life worlds to have their students play around with. It was a virtual world with user-generated content. It was an open world, which means there was tons of exploration, tons of things that could be changed and adjusted. Folks could adapt and generate their own content and create new worlds on both the professor side and the student side. It was interesting because it actually produced some interesting art projects. So one of them was Gone Gitmo in 2009, which some students and a professor created a virtual version of Guantanamo Bay that users can explore. And this was to generate concern over what the US was doing. And it also included clips from survivors describing prisons. So here you have this blending of kind of games, VR, and interactive spaces for the use of, well, one, generating empathy, but two, making kind of critical arguments about the US politics. And it increased awareness to citizens and otherwise who may have missed out. So here's an image of a player in the Second Life world of Gone Gitmo. So this is this particular art piece is probably one of the most interesting things that you can use with Second Life, but most of the time it was just professors holding lectures in a virtual space where they could see the other students. So very rarely did you get these types of interesting and compelling interactive experiences. Nevertheless, they were possible. The other way that we started seeing gaming get picked up in pedagogy was via gamification. And this still has roots in a lot of what happens now, but it's weird how the conversation has shifted. That gamification isn't necessarily taught about anymore because it did such a good job of infusing itself in most of our interactions with kind of everything in the world, that it's not a primary focus. In fact, most people probably end up including elements of their class whether they mean to or not. In some sense, you could actually even think of grading itself as an element of gamification, unless you're considering gamification of just about how do we make it more fun, which ends up being a different conversation altogether. Properly speaking, gamification is the process of adding game-like components to non-game systems in order to improve engagement, performance, or productivity. This is the clinical term for what gamification is. And more or less, it was about getting kids engaged by using game-like activities. Or you would track scores from employees for certain rewards, or it encouraged exercise through game-like programs and social groups. It was interesting. My partner actually got tapped by her company to help gamify their workspace, and she works in insurance. She's an insurance auditor, but they tapped her to try to find a way to introduce some game-like elements so they can increase the productivity of the workers and process insurance forms more efficiently. So that's one of the ways we can think of gamification getting used. We see it most often used in kids. Tons of games have been produced to teach kids particular lessons via games, and then also in companies and corporations, and in the field of fitness. So I don't know if folks here have the Nintendo Switch. If you do, one of the gamified exercise games you could buy is called the Switch Ring Fit, which is just this kind of rubber plastic ring that includes a game, but these gaming elements encourage you to exercise and perform various activities. The most interesting ways this has been used, so we see in 2008, the University of Washington produced a game called Fold It, which you could still access. It's pretty cool. It's a free online game simulating protein folding. So they took this kind of scientific endeavor, this what was otherwise kind of a slow experimental process, turned it into a game so that they broke down all the various elements and then added systems and rules to which players could then experiment. And then players got to earned points as they played through this game, depending on how stable their molecules were. And it resulted in 50,000 or 57,000 players helping find the structure for an AIDS-related enzyme. So here you have what was kind of this academic disciplines of biochemistry and protein folding turned into a game, which was then able to kind of be simulated on a mass level, get lots of player involvement, and actually produced important, real, practical content. Basically just by, well, one, it encouraged players to do something good in the world. Like here, you can play a game by solving a puzzle, this protein puzzle, and it could result in something important. But again, there's also high scores involved. So players could feel like they were competing with one another. They'd introduce competitions, so on and so forth. So all these kind of gaming elements on what would otherwise be a non-gaming related thing that produced something really cool and really valuable. Now, doing this again would be great, but probably hard because things are always going to be a little bit different depending on what your area of study is. So yeah, this is a 15-year problem solved in 10 days, which is really cool. And now, but we can also think about some of the drawbacks of both the concept of gamification and its implementation into the real world. Does it add any value to menial labor? So again, in terms of my partner's company, are the workers really getting any bonus or anything? Are their lives made any better by thinking more gamically in terms of their work? That's a question that still is up for answer. In terms of our students, are we just tricking them into productivity? And is that what we should be kind of thinking about and concerned about? Like, how do we trick them? I mean, we think about this all the time. Like, how do we get our students to do the readings? Or at least that's what us and the folks in the humanities are always worried about. How do we get them to do the readings? But we shouldn't want to come at it quite from an element of tricking them. And in some sense, that's what gamification can do. This is not, it can be used for good things, but this is one of the elements. And then the last question, are there unintended consequences? And one of the kind of more compelling and frightening aspects is Sesame credit. I'm not sure if folks have ever heard of this. So Sesame credit is the Chinese government's way of gamifying social participation in the nation state. So every citizen has a Sesame credit score, and depending on their actions, they gain or lose points based on how I don't know all the details quite yet. It's not an area of study, but it is something I've been kind of keeping my eye on. But basically, they end up grading their systems in this kind of larger political national gamified system. The link down here leads to a video that explains more. If folks are interested, we can check that out later or talk about it later. But this is one of those areas where now we start seeing kind of this complicated thing. Like all of a sudden, your value as a citizen is being gamified in kind of introducing these algorithmic elements that we get from game studies. So always something to kind of keep on the back of our mind when we think about gamifying our classes. So now, my personal experiments and failures with gaming and VR. So as Sean said, I've been using games and video games for a while now, and experimenting with particular technologies. One, to see not, again, I don't want to trick my students into doing things, but I want to use the language and materials that my students are already kind of comfortable and engaged with, to in some sense kind of meet them where they are, because as technology is changing so rapidly, we need to keep up. I mean, for most of us here, we lived through the kind of invention and implementation of the internet, which radically changed our ways of living. And because our particular demographics grew up with this technology, we're engaged with it, and we breathe it in a different way than other demographics might. And our students are the same. They're already being raised and trained to use particular technology types. And if we don't keep up with that, we're losing ways of communicating and engaging with our students. So that's why, that's the mentality I have in kind of engaging with this stuff. So the first thing that I've experimented with is using the social media platform Discord. Now, Discord's a free voice, video, and text chat app that's used by tens of millions of people to talk to and hang out with their communities and friends. The communication occurs on individually crafted servers that can be designed to cater to particular needs of the community. So Discord was specifically designed for and by the video game community in order to organize and keep track of players' online play. So you can kind of organize with your friends. You have the space where you can get together and organize play sessions. And that's how it started. It has blown up way past that, to the point that now Microsoft's considering an acquisition, because this is quickly becoming an alternative social media platform beyond Facebook and beyond some of these other things. And that we have these massive servers filled with friends and strangers getting together, having conversations, and just kind of keeping their community organized. They're kind of, in some sense, artificial but naturally developing community organized in this digital way. And so I experimented last semester, last year, when quarantine first hit. I immediately thought, okay, well, how am I going to get my students involved, and how can I maintain communication? Because Blackboard's not doing it for me. I don't know about you all as pedagogues, but I absolutely hate Blackboard. I think it's slow. I think it's confusing. I think it's hard to update. I think it's hard to manage. I think students get confused by it. It's unwieldy, all sorts of stuff. It's just, and none of us grew up with it, and none of our students did either. So we all kind of come together and we're forced to learn this tech that just is lacking all intuition. So I thought, well, what is it that Blackboard does that I find interesting and valuable, and how, and can I get a Discord server to do the same thing? Because it's likely that a significant portion, if not the majority of my students, are familiar with Discord. And that's proven to be the case for the 2 courses that I've used Discord with. I've only had 2 or 3 students who weren't familiar with Discord. The rest were familiar in some way, which is far more kind of increased than what their experience with Blackboard would have been. So some of the benefits of using Discord. There's a digital community building, in the sense that using Discord in my classes has created a sense of class community, and that the students can kind of see one another. They can see their active comments. There's asynchronous communication, in that I can speak to my students with a sense of immediacy over a week, and as conversations are happening, rather than kind of the slow ping pong of Blackboard emails and notifications. The class organization is in one place that's easy to update, again, unlike Blackboard. There's instant communication and notification for students on multiple devices. So students can use their phones, they can use their PCs, they can use their tablets, they can use basically any device they have in order to stay engaged with class material. And there's a certain aesthetic, affective aspect to it, in that as students comments, as students are engaging in course conversation, you can respond with personalized emojis. You can there's great reply tools and updating web links. So this is one way, and I'm going to show you an example of actually one of my class sessions, that as students were making comments, I could respond, like, instead of saying that's a great comment, I could respond with an emoji of an apple, or a flame, or a 100, to indicate in this kind of aesthetic way that what my students are talking about is valuable, again, as opposed to what otherwise would have happened on Blackboard in terms of like Blackboard comments and responses. Some of the drawbacks. So this is where some of the failure kind of happened as I was developing this problem, this course organization, is that I found it kind of complicated to set up and design for particular course modes. Luckily, I have a friend who's a professional Discord community manager, and he actually helped me with some of the back-end stuff to program the Discord server exactly as I might need it for my classroom, because I wanted to make sure that it was a private server that random other students couldn't just jump in. I wanted to make sure I introduced students to content in a paced manner. I didn't want them to come into the server and be overwhelmed by all the different things they'd have. So there's a slow kind of reveal. And this is stuff that all needed to be programmed ahead of time. The program itself still has some accessibility limitations, which is what they're working to expand. So I was really, really careful about like having kind of students encourage me or let me know if things weren't working or if they weren't getting the data or if they weren't able to access certain material in the way that they needed it for their own learning. Oh, I skipped through the other ones. But here's a video of the classroom. Hopefully you can see this as a shared. The content doesn't really matter, but this is what the Discord app looks like. On the left-hand side, on the very left-hand side, these are all the different servers that the user can join or has joined. They're listed in these kind of little bubbles. So right here at the top, the current server we're looking at is for my Religion 320 class, Religions and Video Gaming. And clicking on that brings you to the main server where the community has been organized. Within this server, then you have this next panel here on this left side. This is the meat and potatoes of Discord. Each one of these lines here, and I can't click on them because this is a video, is its own chat room functionally. So on the left-hand side, we have a way of organizing and separating different places for different conversations to happen. So at the very top, I've got course chat. This is our general channel for students to basically for anything and everything we talk about. Then I have an announcements channel, which I'm the only one that can access. This is where I put out announcements for the class. Then we have channels for terminology, quotes, and memes and media. So as students are doing the readings, if they thought a particular quote was interesting, they can throw it in one of those. And same with memes and media, depending on course content. I then, what you'll see here, hopefully, is groups. So one of the things that Discord makes interesting is you can preemptively put students in groups or what are called roles, and that sections them off and gives them limited accessibility to particular conversations. So before the class started, I've got my students in these small groups, and each of these channels has 5 students in each of these small groups, and they can have their own private course conversation. So in some sense, you can think about these like breakout rooms, but breakout rooms that are chat-based and allow the students to kind of respond and have their own private conversations, whereas the course chat above is for the larger course. This is where anyone can comment, anyone can chat about, but for these smaller groups, it's just the students involved. And then down here near the bottom, I have an FAQ. Each one of these channels is functionally a different aspect of my syllabus. And so students can go to the FAQ whenever they want and see exactly what is going on with the course and what they need to get, what assignments are asking them, so on and so forth. So I've got this video here because this is actually on Mondays, for at least for the way I teach the class this semester. Mondays is our online only day. So every Monday, all the students jump onto Discord and we have our course conversation via Discord. And this is a recording from one of our Monday sessions. I won't play the whole thing, but I'm going to give you a taste of what an online session using this gaming platform of Discord looks like. And then I'll explain how our case study days work afterwards. So I'm starting the class by sending out this message that tags everyone. So everyone who's on Discord at the time, you'll see on the right-hand side, you'll see which students are online, and you're going to see this list populate as students jump in late to the conversation. But I can tag everyone and everyone knows or is given an update that they have this message. And what you're going to see, it's going to be going really quick on this left-hand side here as the names of the groups turn white. That indicates to me that a student has made a comment in that group. And so I'm able to switch between groups and comment on the conversation that they're having. And so you're going to see my students starting to populate and answer questions and communicate to each other about course content. And I'm able to jump between all these small groups to see exactly what they're talking about and how their conversation is developing. I'm able to kind of redirect them if they're starting to go off and talk about different things. There's also an indication at the bottom if students are typing. Then at the end, I have this record of which of my students actually participated. So if yours is a class that wants to keep track of participation and attendance, Discord it's all built in right here. You can see exactly which of your students were involved in and participating. And the conversation goes on. My students, this was a particularly active day in that I probably had more than 80% of the class involved in this online conversation, and it lasted probably, I would say, for a good 70 minutes. The last 10 minutes, they started to trickle out, but they were actively engaged in responding to the questions that I was asking and engaged in thinking and talking about their reading. So hopefully that gives you a small sense of, again, how this conversation goes back and forth. And if people want to see more of this, I'm happy to actually kind of share the program live at the end. But for now, let's move on. Pause. Or actually, here. Oops, let's go. Okay. So that's kind of the successes and failures using Discord. Now talking about VR in particular. So during the quarantine, this isn't as relevant. Well, we'll get there. So virtual reality, just as a general kind of definition, it replaces the real world, even though we put that in quotations because it's complicated, with the digital version achieved through visual and haptic technology. Now, what's great about us here at SU is we have access to the digital scholarship space, which is in the library. It's currently not open. Hopefully it'll be open next week. And I say that because I'm the graduate lab manager there. And so it'll be up to me to open it up, but it hasn't been open during quarantine for obvious reasons. But basically this is a space, it's a workshop, laboratory, and classroom designed for the study and creation of digital artifacts and experiences. It's designed to maximize flexibility in response to emerging digital practices. It supports software design, game study and development, statistical analysis, digital visualization, digital mapping, and the digital virtual humanities and projects across a variety of disciplines. So this is a space where we have a whole suite of VR tech, because right now one of the issues is that VR tech is still pretty expensive and we can't expect all our students to get VR headsets. But what's great about our space is that we have them for you. So you can send your students there and they can experience this stuff themselves. So this is one way of thinking about the hard technology itself. And maybe some of you weren't aware that we had access to this on campus, but you do. So if you do encounter VR tech or stuff or software that you'd like to use for your own classes, you can have the students come to our space to fill it out. But more interestingly, I've stumbled upon, well, not stumbled upon, I'm engaged in conversations and folks recommended that I give this program called Frame VR a try in terms of teaching my classes in digital spaces. So Frame VR is a cross-platform, multi-user, customizable digital virtual environment, explorable using VR headsets, web browser, and mobile devices. So in some sense, this is getting back to our shared world experience that I mentioned earlier in terms of Second Life. But here, this one was specifically designed with VR in mind, yet you can still access it via other technology. So I'd like to give, rather than showing you a video of how this works, I'd like to have you all jump in and check out what the space looks like for yourself. Now, immediately you may notice one of the drawbacks is that when you have too many people in the space, it can get a little, it can slow down your internet bandwidth speed. But if you all would like to jump in this space right now, I also highly recommend when you get in there, it should pop up in your browser to mute yourself or just stay quiet. But this will give you an opportunity to kind of use your keyboard and mouse to explore this digital virtual classroom that I've created. And I can give you a little bit of a tour within this space. So let's make sure we're muted. The mute is on the top right-hand side. So yeah, folks are jumping in. It looks like Ankar, you've used this before. It looks like nice. Okay, so folks are kind of coming in here. So this is one of the spaces that they offer, and you'll see we all kind of populate the space initially as these little digital virtual robots, which you can then adjust and recreate before. What's most useful about this space is how it sections off. You'll see on the ground. Oh, I think I can hear someone. So if we can make sure everyone gets muted. So already, there we go. You're seeing kind of one of the complications that if you don't prep your students well enough ahead of time, this is a failure I had when I first tried to introduce this tech. I tried to prep my students well in advance, but they didn't listen. And so things were super chaotic when we first tried to use the space. But if you look at the ground around some of these tables, you'll see these kind of dotted blue lines. Those dotted blue lines indicate a private kind of vocal zone. So when you enter that space and you have your mics on, it cuts off your conversation from folks outside of the space. So it's one way of generating kind of this in-classroom sense of students being in these private little small groups. And then if you come into this middle room, I've designed this space with these digital virtual panels that you see up top, where students can actually share their camera and share their screen. I was using this space specifically to get my students to play video games together. So one student would share the screen of them playing a video game. And then in small groups, they'd have these private conversation spaces to actually talk about what was going on these screens. I would do an example for you now, but running Zoom, running this and a video game and sharing it would slow us down quite a bit, which again is one of the drawbacks. So this is giving you just a little bit of space. You all are welcome to explore this. We can explore it a bit more later, but just to give you a sense of what we're talking about when I'm talking about Frame VR, I'm going to exit now and come back to the our presentation. So yeah, Frame VR is a more interesting kind of pedagogically focused space for this that allows for us as educators to design the space with a little bit more ease than something like Second Life or some of these other programs. It's also designed with presentations and things in mind, unlike some of the stuff that Oculus and Facebook are producing. And it's relatively easy to use, but still, because it's still so new, folks aren't quite as familiar and it's not as intuitive as others might want it to be. The benefits is that it allows you to break into small groups that feel like the real world. Students can present class material in a room that allows for three-dimensional interactions. So it gives you a body as opposed to just Zoom, which is primarily just faces. And something about having a body in these spaces makes it feel like you're there with people, which again is an important tool for our pedagogy, kind of creating this sense of classroom community. What's nice is that the space can be open 24/7. So if students wanted to stick around in the room or enter it later, they have access to that. What's also nice is that it's currently free, although we'll see how long that lasts. Yeah, it creates a sense of being there or being together. And it's something different than just a webcam, which is nice. And it also runs on any available tech, so students shouldn't have too much of a problem with accessibility. Some of the drawbacks, it's limited to 30 users. So if you have a larger class, chances are you're not going to be able to make use of this space. It also takes significant prep and training, at least initially, to get students comfortable using the space. When I tried using it in my class this semester twice, and it was chaos both times. And so I ended up having to give up. And part of my frustration is like, I had laid out, I had told the students what they needed to do beforehand, but they still didn't listen. And trying to troubleshoot in the middle of class while trying to teach just wasn't working. So I had to give it up. But I think if you had a smaller class size, between 5 and 10 students, this would be a fantastic way of just doing something different in these digital virtual spaces. Yeah, and then organizing students once inside. I think doing this with freshmen would be like herding cats, so probably might not be the best. And then last but not least, it uses a lot of bandwidth and can be sloppy if you have a slow connection. So probably smaller class sizes is best, or guaranteed kind of faster connective internet. Last but not least, the one other thing I've attempted to use and will be using again at the end of my class this semester is the gaming software platform Twitch. It's one of the leading live stream services dedicated to gaming related content. In 2021, there were 2.9 million concurrent users. There's roughly 10 million active streamers. And this was just in February. So lots of folks using this stuff, lots of content being consumed. And 41%, so like our students are again in the prime demographic of who are using this, who are familiar with Twitch. And in terms of lectures, I don't have, unfortunately, I don't have a recording of myself using it, but here is a professor who's been
Hey, yo, what's up, everybody? How y'all doing?
Can folks hear the sound from the video?
Can y'all hear me? Can y'all see me? Okay. Show me some love up in the chat. My name is Dr. Chris for Alexander, and I'm known at Ryerson as the professor of video games. And I,
teach on Twitch. I've been teaching for, what is this, my 12th year now? I had been teaching for 7 years at Ryerson University. I left for 5 years to teach at Humber College and build up their collegiate esport infrastructure. People can expect in a classroom with me is these live subtitles. I have different scenes where I bring up different contextual things. I have a little joke every now and again that I bring in. Like this one right here, where I just pretend that I'm teaching straight and talking. I do this inside of staff meetings as well. Sometimes people get frustrated, but it gets really awkward in a second because it's not a loop. He's actually just staring for a while. He'll put his thumb back down, wait for it. I set it up so that students live in class, they ask questions in the chat, which pop up on screen in real time, and the students see that I noticed their questions, and then I respond to them in real time. And this affords them in their lecture to be like, hey, what did you mean by that? Immediately, I can see who it is, I can call them out, I can chat with them.
Come on, folks. This is not whatever they say about video games on the news. This is not it. They're not talking about how incredible it is to design something like this.
I do know that gamers, and I also happen to be one, we know that this is the platform. Twitch, Discord, YouTube, live streaming. This is what we've been doing for how many years? It's just now the pandemic has forced people to be like, what, this is a thing? Yeah, of course it's been a thing. And the genesis of all this was, I was in a meeting one time and it was suggested that we couldn't captivate students over Zoom for more than 30 minutes. And I was like, have y'all ever seen a Twitch stream? Have you seen people sitting in front of a machine for like 12-hour marathons for charity? Of course humans can sit in front of a screen for a long period of time if they're afforded the ability to engage.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a great class. You take good care, and we'll see you next week. Hey, yo, what's up, everybody?
I think Dr. Anderson did a much better job than what I could have done walking you through, again, just the value of something like Twitch, which functionally isn't that much different than what we do on Zoom, but nevertheless, it's in the cultural milieu in a way that our students might be more likely to engage, might be more likely to participate, because the learning is happening in an environment and in a language and in a context that they're more familiar with than the more stilted professional aspect of that Zoom kind of offers. So again, just a way of kind of easing students into being willing to learn. But some of the so the benefits I think are a little bit more obvious. It runs on desktop. Students are familiar with it as part of their tech consumption habits. It's also for you personally as a pedagogue. I haven't done much with this yet. I've considered doing it. You can like the Twitch. You're doing a Twitch live stream is kind of live for everybody. So you could build a brand like Dr. Anderson does. As part of your pedagogy as being a professor who does this stuff on this medium. Lectures are automatically recorded and saved for later use. And it feels less formal than Zoom. So this is one of those things. Now, obviously, it creates a sense of being there, much like Frame VR, and it's something other than the webcam experience. Now, some of the drawbacks uses a lot of data and bandwidth with potential for crashes and lag. Again, like most of the software, finding out how to balance the value or the level of fidelity of the viewing experience is important. If not managed properly, it can result from commenters from outside of the class. So it takes significant prep to make sure only your students in the class have signed up ahead of time to be able to be the primary commenters throughout the course lecture. We probably wouldn't be opposed. And this is also another thing. It's like I'm not quite sure. I haven't used this yet, and I haven't used it for lectures. But in terms of your own material, it being open to folks outside of the university is a question we kind of have to keep in mind. Also, student interaction is limited primarily to commenting. So there's not going to be an opportunity for them to jump in via voice chat. They're just in comments, which most of our students use anyway in terms of Zoom. But the bigger thing is kind of prepping ahead of time, making sure it's just your students because you don't want to be overwhelmed by a host of strangers. And then balancing kind of the interactive elements. But again, it's more about trying our best to kind of use the language that our students are familiar with. So that's it in terms of lecture. Now I open the rest of our time up to kind of Q&A, or if folks wanted to explore some of the content or some of the previous video games, I'm happy to do that. But just general thoughts, general ideas. And if folks here have used programs that I haven't, please let me know. I'm constantly looking for kind of new things. So if you've had great experiences, or if you've had your own failure experiences, feel free to share them at this time as well. Uh, is it Charis? Or I'm not sure how to say
No,
your name.
it's Karis, and I'm
Oh,
clapping for
Karis.
you.
Oh, thank you. I thought that was a
Yeah.
hand raise.
No, I have my cousin here is a gamer, and he's enjoying the presentation. So
Oh, great. I'm happy
yeah,
to hear
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Thank you, Karis.
Anyway, so since I have the floor, could you talk a little bit about the digital scholarship space? It's super interesting. What you do in the space, and I'm in the high school, but I'm
Okay.
wondering, how open is it? Should I reach out to you if I want to get to know a bit more about it? And yeah.
Definitely reach out, and hopefully next week. So next week it's going to be me clearing out the space, because for most of the pandemic it was being used for other purposes, but now we're making it our scholarship space again. But yeah, definitely reach out to me. I'm happy to give you a tour. So my job there, I'm the graduate lab manager. I basically just kind of manage the space. I work through organizations. I connect with professors. We've got quite a few professors who use the space specifically to teach their students, so they actually use it as their classroom space, so they can immediately switch over to using the VR tech or to playing video games. We have the whole suite of video game systems. Professor Chris Hansen, if folks have ever encountered with him, he was one of the originators of the space. He uses it to teach his video games and English course. I used it to teach my video games and religion course, which was designed in a way that the Wednesday of every week, I actually used it as the lab. So I had my students jump on video game systems and play video games and discuss it during class time. So they were able to get hands-on experience talking and playing through the games that we were learning about, and comparing it to some of the larger concepts. So the space is just there to give folks and professors and students hands-on access to the tech, whether they want to build stuff for it. We have computers where they can build games themselves, or what if they are using other pieces of software for cultural analysis, for object studies, for whatever it is they kind of can come to mind. It's basically just a space for the tech to be used by those who want to use it.
Yeah, thank you. I'll definitely reach out.
Sweet,
Connect.
sounds good. I
Yeah,
look forward
yeah,
to it.
yeah. Thank you.
Daniel, I think that's a hand.
That is a hand. So I have a couple of questions, but I think one of the bigger ones is for a lot of like trying to bring games rather than just gamification into the classroom, you're dealing with more kind of ephemeral experiences. And for a classroom setting, quite often you want students to be able to look back at it and review and revise.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas for like a game, you might not be able to get that experience again. Or as we brought up earlier with like Flash games, if a student wanted to come back to an experience in just a couple of years,
Mm-hmm.
like now that they've moved on to HTML5 and other engines like that, like Flash isn't even natively supported by any of the major browsers anymore.
Yeah. So that's very much dependent on games too, and in some sense, we're suffering from we're suffering the same problem with older video game consoles. In that, I mean, now these companies are starting to re-release the versions of the tech. Like we just got the Atari re-release and a Sega Genesis, and even an early NES re-release. But for a time, well, one of the issues we were running into, if you really needed or wanted to teach the original Super Mario at an NES console, like it was hard to get your hands on that particular piece of tech. And the same thing happens with kind of these Flash games as well. And yeah, that's very much a struggle. So, I mean, for us as pedagogues, if we're using these as important examples, we're either going to need to make sure we have access ourselves and that we can make sure our students have access. So this is an archive question. Or alternatively, it's going to take constant work in staying up to date with the stuff that's being produced and finding kind of substitutions perhaps for the games and the things you want to explore, have your students get hands-on with. So you're 100% right. This is, and the archive question is one that like only I think in the past few years, all of a sudden folks are realizing like, oh my goodness, yeah, we need to make sure we keep this stuff so that folks can use it. But in some sense, it's like the same as any media. Like with classic film, if it hasn't been digitized, you lose access to those old film rolls. So you're right. This is an important question, and there are different strategies for resolving it.
If no one else has questions, I can keep picking your brain.
Go for it, please. And then if someone has a question they want to jump, they can raise their hand, and then we can kind of interrupt.
Yeah, so I guess I'll open up to anyone else. If you want to cut me off, cut me off. Because yeah, like I'm big into like video game preservation. So the archives question has been around for a while.
Yeah.
And especially with the move to like games as a service with like
Yeah.
your MMORPGs, it's just not possible for a lot of situations anymore.
And well, sorry, that's even more fascinating. So you're the expert in some sense in the archive question. I'm only coming at it from the practice side, because one of the issues, even in the digital scholarship space that we're running into, is if professors want to teach a particular game, well, one, they like, luckily we have funds, we can buy them that game, but we have to buy multiple copies for each computer. And sometimes like it would just be easier. Like, well, and what's nice about the games as service actually is that we can ask our students as part of kind of the course prep, rather than paying for a book, they can maybe pay $12 a month to have access to a suite of games. So we kind of get around that issue there. But even in terms of organizing our lab, making sure we have games on the systems that we want has been difficult, because we have to download and have individual instances for each piece of tech, as opposed to having kind of a suite that the students could access. Or even in terms of like getting SU to purchase an archive of games that the students could then access and play on their own time. We don't have that. It doesn't exist, and there aren't conversations about that. So students, in some sense, actually have to come to our lab. So the digital scholarship spaces become extremely important for that, because that's the one space students can access for free on campus the games that we as various professors have been kind of requiring them to get their hands on and play with.
Yeah, that has me thinking about like fair use for copyright for games, because fair use does open it up in general for educational purposes. But I don't think that's ever really been put to the test in an educational setting with games. It's been put to the test for like, you can play some like song by Beyonce and break it down in a music class, but grabbing Super Mario and using it to try and teach, say, assembly language for like 6502 assemblers. I don't think that's really been pushed.
I think you're right. It's still very much kind of the Wild West, and we do our best to try to get that. But yeah, there's questions too. So like, if we have one video game console, we have 5 students passing the controller around, like that's kind of a similar question too, even in play. Now, I think we can kind of get away with that because I mean, or at least the companies haven't made pushes. I mean, people do this in their homes, they share the controller, but the gray area of how it works in educational settings, I think you're right. This is beyond my ken. In some sense, I'm one of those folks like, it's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission in terms of making use of this stuff, but these are conversations that definitely kind of need to happen and will be happening as things go on.
I can't fault for you for that. I've recently just started getting into. I was a Nintendo kid, and I recently purchased the Sega Genesis and the Sega Saturn, but especially for like the US Sega Saturn, you're looking at these games can cost thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
So
yes.
For an individual to play this and to experience and to be able to comment on it, like, it's just not feasible for the average individual.
So a problem that is specifically this semester, so I didn't have access. No, like normally when I teach my Religion 320 class, I have access to the DSS, and I'm the lab manager there, so I get what I want, and I've curated and cultivated my class around that. Having to do it online, I can't expect my students to have access to these consoles. I can't expect them to buy the AAA games. So what I actually had to do this semester, there's a fantastic video game curation website called itch.io or itch.io, which has a full suite of thousands upon thousands of independent games, most of which are either free or they allow the user to download them and pay what they want, depending on if they enjoy the game or not. So I had to scour that website for games that that were doing the same things that some of the more high quality games were doing, so that my students could get hands-on with these games. But even that still requires that the developers keep their itch.io website up to date, that they keep the video game on there, that it still remains kind of free to access, free to play. And I may only ever be able to do what I did this semester based off of this issue of keeping games up to date and things like that. So again, it requires a lot of work on my part to make sure I'm very aware of what's been produced and how accessible it is for my students, for it to even be teachable.
Yeah, definitely with itch.io being that independent games kind of sales space, unlike Steam or Epic, GOG less so, where they're just they're pushing that big commercial, whereas itch.io is much more open to, like, I think Depression Quest, as you mentioned, originally was a release on itch.io. I don't think it was ever released anywhere else.
Yeah, and I actually haven't checked to see if it's even still there. I think it might be one of those games that I don't know if it's on there anymore. Because I know I had a whole suite of games that I had been going to itch.io for, and I can't. They're gone. So like even now, it's still like things are getting flushed out and added. So it very much to make it work requires significant work on my part as well. My hope actually, and so I didn't even mention this. So part of the art collective I'm a part of is one of the things we're looking for is to eventually create an archive of kind of teachable games, or with specifically kind of for pedagogical purposes and how they were used, as part of this issue of making it so we all don't have to be doing the work of curation, that if there could be a space of curation that folks could add to, then they can go there to find perhaps what they need rather than having to scour the whole thing on their own. But that's a long-term project that's just in its infancy.
I'd say it's a noble goal, especially with like archival finally starting, people, as you said, people are finally talking about it.
Yeah.
Now that you're getting this archive and people are grabbing everything, now there's the need to curate it.
Yeah,
to decide,
exactly.
Well, what is it that you're going to be using this for?
Exactly.
Jordan, I got a question.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we hear a lot about, in like kind of generally in the equity context and in terms of universal design for learning, provision of multiple modalities for content delivery, but also for assessment. And I'm just I'm wondering if if any of these games or the platforms that you were sharing, if you've ever tried to exploit those for assessment purposes, and if so, what that looked like and what the student reaction was.
That's a great question. So in the specific design of my course, one of the things I let the students know is I'm not grading you on how well you play these games. I had to be really careful about that because not all my students, at least as they enter in, consider themselves gamers or even game players. They're just kind of interested in broadly. So I can't assess them on how well they play. So I had to find obviously different ways of assessment. And plus, that's in some sense, I'm not the lessons and the goals of my pedagogy. I'm not asking them to learn the skills of Mario being able to jump up and down. I'm more interested in kind of cultural critique and algorithmic critique. So I've had to design assessments alongside, not on their ability again to play, but their ability to see and break down the elements of the games themselves. So most of the time, the struggle I always have with my students is they always get caught up with the aesthetics of the game. Like, oh, this game is pretty, or oh, this game is boring because it's only like pixels. I wish it was 3D. And I'm trying to break that down to say, okay, you can look beyond just the visual aesthetics. You can even look a lot beyond what visual elements are included. It's like, oh, this game, because I'm a religion scholar, like my students are like, oh, this game has a cross in it, so it must be a Christian game. And I'm like, okay, no, like stop looking at even just those kind of visual elements. That's just one layer, and it might not even be reflective of what you want. But we can start breaking down video games. What are the things you can do in the game? Oh, well, this game lets me shoot other humans. Oh, okay, so that's an interesting action. Why did the game designers include that? And what does that say about kind of the larger ideas and the larger aspects that this game is trying to teach or trying to get you to explore? Or this game allows me to decide whether to be kind or unkind to a person. Well, that's an interesting binary. Why did the designers try to be so obvious with that binary? Could they have been a little bit more implicit about it? And all of a sudden you're thinking more complexly about the types of actions you can take. So that's what I'm looking to get the students to think and talk about, which requires them to think less about the game and the scores and those aspects as the thing being assessed, and more about learning how to see games differently and in their complexity, both as kind of design technological objects, but then also what they're doing in our kind of our larger cultural experiences. So most of my assessments end up asking questions like that and pushing the students to, I think, so on one of my weekly assignments specifically for my 320 class is every week they have a case study, and the first 3 questions are list as many actions you can that you can take in this game. What are as many of the things you can do in this game in terms of you as a controller and as a player? Then list the visual aspects. Now list the different ways the visual aspects and the playable aspects interact, so you can start thinking about the rules that this game has laid out. Because now we start seeing rules shape the type of actions and feelings and things you see. And then we can start thinking largely, okay, well, video games do this, but all sorts of cultural systems have rules. And now how are those cultural system rules shaping the things we can do and see and act? So that's how my assessment works. It's less about them playing the game itself, although it does require them to push the game to its limits, to test out all the different actions they can take, but not at how good they are. It's basically just the amount that they can find. And that's variable, which is why with my case studies, I usually have them in groups. So because some students are capable of thinking and pushing the boundaries of what the game can do, whereas other folks might actually be better at kind of visualizing and seeing that. So group work ends up being pretty important in this as well, at least in terms of how I've taught this class so far, but I could see it being differently. I mean, there's the medium is just so new and so fresh, and it's so ripe for rich experimentation in terms of teaching, and we're only at the cusp of it. So and which is why I was excited to give this talk, and hopefully just to meet more folks doing this, because there aren't very many of us, and those of us that there are, there's not many folks kind of vocalizing or talking about it quite so explicitly yet.
I say, if I can follow on from Glenn's question, Glenn kind of brought up accessibility, and I was thinking, especially like as you mentioned, like these old consoles, you can't get people access to them, but also definitely it used to be like there wasn't as many selection in, say, like controller designs.
Yep.
Though recently you've seen like Microsoft make really big pushes for accessible controllers.
Yep.
So I was thinking about that, and like how would like emulation fit into that? Because emulation allows you to basically, you have a computer running the game, and now you can have any kind of controller you'd like.
Yeah.
And so for some people, like they might not be able to do certain tasks like rapid tapping. You could just give them a dedicated button that switches on rapid tapping.
Yeah, emulation is a very, very gray area. So I mean, from what I know, I mean, like, I don't even know how you go about asking permission from the company to be able to emulate their game for that particular purpose. Like, they're just so, the companies are so closed off in terms of accessing for those types of conversations, questions. Nevertheless, they are important. So Microsoft's introduction of their new programmable controller is so important. We've been waiting to get 2 versions for the digital scholarship space specifically for this reason. The quarantine hit and we weren't able to get them yet. But it's really, really important. And again, without Microsoft doing this, we probably would have been stuck in that gray area of having specifically to use emulation and do it until you get in trouble, kind of thing. Luckily, I haven't had to dabble in that too much, but I spot on. These are serious concerns for sure.
I know from my experience, the emulators tend to be legally fine, but then the ROMs and the ISOs that are used with them, that's where all the copyright issue pops up. So
yeah, and so it's like there is tech for making your own ROMs. That's not something I have delved in, and it might actually be something I believe, again, there's legal gray area there whether you can make ROMs of game ownership. I'm not sure how that would work on the university level. So technically, the DSS owns all these games. Would we be in the is it part of our legal rights to then make ROMs of all the games that we own for accessibility issues? That's beyond my ken, but again, important questions.
Yeah, definitely it falls into the same gray area of just in general people making like you're allowed to make a copy of a Blu-ray for your own personal uses.
Yeah.
But does that extend to like being allowed for an educational purpose?
And the same question applies to mods as well, creating modifications of games. And I mean, a lot more games now are giving players the tools to modify the game themselves. But they're like, I'm sure we're going to have college students who are capable of breaking down the code of a game and modifying it to really kind of interesting artistic purposes. And I mean, they can do that kind of probably on their own fair use right, but then how do we start thinking about maybe doing that for education as well, modifying games to put students in different experiential positions than the game itself might have offered originally? Again, it's the Wild West. It's part of we just need people to at least try.
Jordan, I was just interested in, some of the games that you use in the class and how you use them. Also coming from sort of a religion background, I'm very interested in not only the use of sort of religious imagery and religious ideas in games, but also the game itself as a religious experience. So I'm sort of interested in the content that you use.
So a whole broad range, and it depends on kind of the theme for the week. So last week I had students looking at affect theory, which is a kind of an important conceptual tool in the humanities, and looking at the ways. So I should probably start. So how I frame the course initially is that both video games and religion are really, really interested in rules and actions, in defining the limitations of the ways you can act in the world and how those actions change how you see, think, and feel and experience the world more broadly. And so we can think of games as kind of taking advantage of these religious elements, and then we can also look at the ways religion functions gamically. And the cross between these two conversations allows us to have enriching discussions about what's going on. What's nice about games is that they visualize what the rules and what these things and the algorithms are doing in ways that other media don't quite. So we can actually get a better sense of how our thoughts, feelings, and stuff are being shaped and changed by the actions we take within the game. So last week was the theme was affect theory. So I was trying to get the students to play games that were intentionally designed with particular feelings in mind. And then if some students are too cool, they're like, I'm too cool to have feelings, so like they ignore. But I found that some of my students get deeply affected by the experience of the game, and then it's an interesting conversation of why those students did and why the other students did it, and what were the elements and game design choices that led to those feelings. So one of the games I gave the students an options of playing if they had it last week is called That Dragon Cancer. It was a game designed by two parents of a 2-year-old who was diagnosed with a terminal cancer at a really young age. And then the game was basically, an interactive experience for working through their own grief. They designed the game, one, for them to process their own grief, but then two, to design an experience to give other people an opportunity to see what that's like. And so it's this kind of interactive story that allows players to do particular things. They included kind of voiceovers and different elements that get you in the sense of what it's like witnessing the grieving of a parent losing a child. And it's not like Fortnite. This isn't a game where you're running around shooting at people. So it's a very, very different type of experience. But nevertheless, there was intentional design choices that went in to crafting an experience to produce the sensation of grief and working through it. So that's one of the games that I use. That's probably one of the more intense ones. I also use quite a fefew games from Mulla Industria, who's an independent game designer. I'll post the link to his games in the chat. So Mulla Industria designs what he calls kind of like these political games that are meant to use rules, algorithms, and actions to get players thinking about the decision making that goes into kind of policies and production. He's famous for designing the McDonald's video game, which is a game where you play as kind of a McDonald's corporation CEO, and you're trying to make McDonald's as successful as possible. But the choices you're making are about how to level indigenous land in the Amazon, whether you're going to inject cows with steroids so you can enhance your beef production. And so it's getting players to complicate, what exactly is McDonald's doing to get as rich and as valuable as they are? And then, yeah, one of the choices is you can quell dissent by, I don't think they include assassination in the game, at least not physical assassination, but it's like character assassination. You can do that to level critics so that you can avoid criticism. And so this is one of those games that gets students realizing like, games can say serious things about the world. And if they can make me think this way, like, I mean, the McDonald's video game is really, really explicit. One of the things I'm letting them know is the explicit ones are easy. It's easy to see the arguments happening in these explicit ones. It's a little bit more insidious when we realize games across the board are doing this. And so we need to start becoming aware of how they're doing this and what their arguments actually are. Because if we're not becoming aware of them, then they're affecting us and we're becoming people we didn't have much choice in making. So Mulla Industria is fantastic for that, for these really interesting conversation pieces. There's quite a few, and I'm happy to put together kind of an email or a list of some of my archive to send to folks that were here today if they're interested in, just so they can see the type of options of what's out there for games as kind of conversation pieces. Again, for in pedagogy, folks don't have to have their students play these games or think broadly, but there are games out there that can get the students having interesting conversations, whether it becomes part of the whole class or just for that one class period. But it's just a matter of knowing what's out there. And so again, curation is part of the issue here.
All right, well, if everyone else is, I'll keep bothering you. I'll cut myself off at this last one question, where this is more aimed at your work here. So you've spent a good amount of time talking about bringing games and gamification into the classroom. But I'm curious if your work here includes bringing game development and game design into the classroom. You've mentioned you have access to these consoles, so like maybe like hosting a Ludum Dare and letting someone actually deploy a game onto original hardware.
I would love that. So my background isn't in game design specifically. I don't have a coding language I can call my own. But with my students, I've always encouraged them, if any of them have any kind of game design, game development background, I would love for them to do that. And for the first time, I actually have a student who, for his final assignment, is planning on designing a game incorporating some of the themes and topics of our course. So I am totally, I get excited by that idea. I wish more students would think that way. And in some ways, right now, my student demographic ends up primarily being kind of students in the humanities or students in psychology, I wish I could get my hands on students who are doing specifically design, because I think the critical theory stuff we're doing could better inform their own kind of programming approaches, broadly speaking, in terms of whether they're programming games or not, but then also specifically in game design. But for whatever reason, this semester is the first time where I've actually had comp sci students who come in who are interested in doing game development. And I'm not sure if that's just the nature of how kind of SU ends up being a bit siloed in that way, or what. But I'm totally, I would get excited by students doing that. And then even myself, I've considered, like, there are simple programs out there that you don't need to learn a programming language to be able to create a game. Like there's Twine and a few others, and Game Maker. And I've considered doing that, but 14 weeks is so short for my 320 class anyway. And I'm doing these two things where I'm introducing them both to concepts in the study of religion and concepts in the study of critical video games. So the fact that I'm doing both these kind of heavy conceptual things, I don't then also have time to teach them how to use these kind of other programs and software. If I could develop this into a 2-part course, that would definitely be something I consider incorporating. But as a singular 320, I just don't have the time to do it. But if I ever get a tenure track job and have some say in shaping the classes I teach, that very much is the goal.
Yeah, well, thank you for answering all of my questions, and especially that last one. I was going to bring up the like, as you said, Twine Game Maker. Yeah. Since I know a few artist friends that have developed their first game having no programming experience whatsoever.
It's very exciting what can be done. And again, like once I have more hand in shaping kind of the classes I teach, that will definitely be the case.
Yeah, I'll stop eating up your time, and I think Glenn and Sean probably would be happy to be rid of me as well. So,
well, I appreciate it, Daniel. Thank you very much.
We've got a couple of minutes left. If anyone has sort of a parting question for Jordan. Again, the good pedagogy is what, 10 seconds of silence, but silence online is very telling.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if no one has any other questions, please take this opportunity to thank Jordan. This was an amazing presentation, full of really great content.
Thank you.
Yeah. So if anyone wants to sort of review what was presented today, I did record the session, so just let me know. I can share it with you. I'll certainly send or give ownership over to Jordan as well. And just a quick plug: we have 2 more TA program workshops coming in the next 2 Fridays. Next week we have one. Teaching with objects, about using some of the resources at SU and the art museums to in your pedagogy. And then the one coming on April 23rd is about the evaluation kit program or platform that the university is trying out. So there's an information session for TAs there as well. But thank you, Jordan, so much. This was great. And I look forward to hearing more about not only your work at the library, but how your courses continue to develop. This is really exciting stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming out, and take care.